This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information and to find out how you can volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Recorded by Chip in Tampa, Florida, on March the 28th, 2006. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 29. The House of Morel and Son. Anyone who had quitted Marseille a few years previously, well acquainted with the interior of Morel's warehouse, and had returned at this date, would have found a great change. Instead of that air of life, of comfort, and of happiness that permeates a flourishing and prosperous business establishment, instead of merry faces at the windows, busy clerks hurrying to and fro in the long corridors, instead of the court filled with bales of goods, re-echoing with the cries and jokes of porters, one would have immediately perceived all aspects of sadness and gloom. Out of all the numerous clerks that used to fill the deserted corridor and the empty office, but two remained. One was a young man of 23 or 24, who was in love with Monsieur Morel's daughter, and had remained with him in spite of the efforts of his friends to induce him to withdraw. The other was an old one-eyed cashier called Coquelet, or Cockeye, a nickname given him by the young men who used to throng his vast and now almost deserted beehive, and which had so completely replaced his real name that he would not in all probability have replied to anyone who addressed him by it. Coquelet remained in Monsieur Morel's service, and a most singular change had taken place in his position. He had at the same time risen to the rank of cashier and sunk to the rank of a servant. He was, however, the same Coquelet, good, patient, devoted, but inflexible on the subject of arithmetic, the only point on which he would have stood firm against the world, even against Monsieur Morel, and strong in the multiplication table which he had at his fingers' ends, no matter what scheme or what trap was laid to catch him. In the midst of the disasters that befell the house, Coquelet was the only one unmoved. But this did not arise from a want of affection. On the contrary, from a firm conviction. Like the rats that one by one forsake the doomed ship even before the vessel weighs anchor, so all the numerous clerks had by degrees deserted the office and the warehouse. Coquelet had seen them go without thinking of inquiring the cause of their departure. Everything was, as we have said, a question of arithmetic to Coquelet, and during the 20 years he had always seen all payments made with such exactitude that it seemed as impossible to him that the house should stop payment as that it would to a miller that the river that had so long turned his mill should cease to flow. Nothing had as yet occurred to shake Coquelet's belief. The last month's payment had been made with the most scrupulous exactitude. Coquelet had detected an overbalance of 14 sous in his cash, and the same evening he had brought them to Monsieur Morel, who, with a melancholy smile, threw them into the almost empty drawer, saying, "Thanks, Coquelet, you are the pearl of cashiers." Coquelet went away perfectly happy, for this eulogium of Monsieur Morel, himself the pearl of the honest men of Marseille, flattered him more than a present of 50 crowns. But since the end of the month, Monsieur Morel had passed on many an anxious hour. In order to meet the payments then due, he had collected all his resources, and, fearing lest the report of his distress should get bruited about at Marseille when he was known to be reduced to such an extremity, he went to the Beaucaire fair to sell his wife's and daughter's jewels and a portion of his plate. By this means the end of the month was passed, but his resources were now exhausted. Credit, owing to the reports afloat, was no longer to be had, and to meet the 100,000 francs due at the 10th of the present month, and the 100,000 francs due on the 15th of the next month to Monsieur de Boisville, Monsieur Morel had in reality no hope but the return of the Pharaon, of whose departure he had learnt from a vessel which had weighed anchor at the same time, and which had already arrived in harbour. But this vessel, like the Pharaon, came from Calcutta, and had been in for a fortnight, while no intelligence had been received of the Baron. Such was the state of his affairs when, the day after his interview with Monsieur de Boisville, the confidential clerk of the house of Thomson and French of Rome presented himself at Monsieur Morel's. Emmanuel received him. This young man was alarmed by the appearance of every new face, for every new face might be that of a new creditor, come in anxiety to question the head of the house. The young man, wishing to spare his employer the pain of this interview, questioned the newcomer, but the stranger declared that he had nothing to say to Monsieur Emmanuel, and that his business was with Monsieur Morel in person. Emmanuel sighed and summoned Cocles. Cocles appeared, and the young man bade him conduct the stranger to Monsieur Morel's apartment. Cocles went first, and the stranger followed him. On the staircase they met a beautiful girl of 16 or 17, who looked with anxiety at the stranger. "Monsieur Morel is in his room, is he not, Mademoiselle Julie?" said the cashier. "Yes, I think so, at least," said the young girl hesitatingly. "Go and see, Cocles, if my father is there. Announce the gentleman." "It will be useless to announce me, mademoiselle," returned the Englishman. "Monsieur Morel does not know my name. This worthy gentleman has only to announce the confidential clerk of the house of Thomson and French of Rome, with whom your father does business." The young girl turned pale and continued to descend, while the stranger and Cocles continued to mount the staircase. She entered the office where Emmanuel was, while Cocles, by the aid of a key he possessed, opened a door in the corner of a landing-place on the second staircase, conducted the stranger into an antechamber, opened a second door, which he closed behind him, and, after having left the clerk of the house of Thomson and French alone, returned and signed to him that he could enter. The Englishman entered, and found Morel seated at a table, turning over the formidable columns of his ledger, which contained the list of his liabilities. At the sight of the stranger, Monsieur Morel closed the ledger, arose, and offered a seat to the stranger, and when he had seen him seated, resumed to his own chair. 14 years had changed the worthy merchant, who in his 36th year at the opening of this history now was in his 50th. His hair had turned white, and his sorrow had ploughed deep furrows on his brow, and his look, once so firm and penetrating, was now irresolute and wandering, as if he feared being forced to fix his attention on some particular thought or person. The Englishman looked at him with an air of curiosity, evidently mingled with interest. "Monsieur," said Morel, whose uneasiness was increased by this examination, "you wish to speak to me?" "Yes, monsieur. You are aware from where I come?" "The house of Thomson and French, at least so my cashier tells me." "He has told you rightly. The house of Thomson and French had 300 or 400,000 francs to pay this month in France, and, knowing your strict punctuality, have collected all the bills bearing your signature, and charged me, as they became due, to present them, and to employ the money otherwise." Morel sighed deeply, and passed his hand over his forehead, which was covered with perspiration. "So then, sir," said Morel, "you hold bills of mine?" "Yes, and for a considerable sum." "What is the amount?" asked Morel, with a voice he strove to render firm. "Here it is," said the Englishman, taking a quantity of papers from his pocket. "An assignment of 200,000 francs to our house by Monsieur de Boisville, the inspector of prisons, to whom they are due. You acknowledge, of course, that you owe this sum to him?" "Yes. He placed the money in my hands at 4.5% nearly 5 years ago." "When are you to pay?" "Half the 15th of this month, half the 15th of next." "Just so. And now there are 32,500 francs payable shortly. They are all signed by you, and assigned to our house by the holders." "I recognize them," said Morel, whose face was suffused, as he thought that, for the first time in his life, he would be unable to honor his own signature. "Is that all?" "No. I have, for the end of the month, these bills, which have been assigned to us by the house of Pascal, and the house of Wilde and Turner of Marseille, amounting to nearly 55,000 francs. In all, 287,500 francs. It is impossible to describe what Morel suffered during this enumeration. 287,500 francs, repeated he. Yes, sir, repeated the Englishman. I will not, continued he, after a moment's silence, conceal from you that, while your probity and exactitude up to this moment are universally acknowledged, yet the report is current in Marseille that you are not able to meet your liabilities. At this almost brutal speech, Morel turned deathly pale. Sir, he said, up to this time, and it is now more than 24 years since I received the direction of this house from my father, who had himself conducted it for 35 years, never has anything bearing the signature of Morel and Son been dishonored. I know that, replied the Englishman, but as a man of honor you should answer another. Tell me fairly, shall you pay these with the same punctuality? Morel shuddered, and looked at the man, who spoke with more assurance than he had hitherto shown. To questions frankly put, said he, a straightforward answer should be given. Yes, I shall pay, if, as I hope, my vessel arrives safely, for its arrival will again procure me the credit which the numerous accidents of which I have been the victim have deprived me. But if the Pharon should be lost, and this last resource be gone... The poor man's eyes filled with tears. Well, said the other, if this last resource fail you? Well, returned Morel, it is a cruel thing to be forced to say, but already used to misfortune, I must habituate myself to shame. I fear I shall be forced to suspend payment. Have you no friends who could assist you? Morel smiled mournfully. In business, sir, said he, one has no friends, only correspondents. It is true, murmured the Englishman. Then you have but one hope. But one. The last? The last. So that if this fail, I am ruined, completely ruined. And as I was on my way here, a vessel was coming into port. I know it, sir. A young man who still adheres to my fallen fortune passes a part of his time in a belvedere at the top of the house in hopes of being the first to announce good news to me. He has informed me of the arrival of this ship. And it is not yours? No, she is a Bordeaux vessel, La Gironde. She comes from India also, but she is not mine. Perhaps she has spoken the Pharon, and brings you some tidings of her. Shall I tell you plainly one thing, sir? I dread almost as much to receive any tidings of my vessel as to remain in doubt. Uncertainty is still hope. Then in a low voice Morel added, This delay is not natural. The Pharon left Calcutta 5th of February. She ought to have been here a month ago. What is that? Said the Englishman. What is the meaning of that noise? Oh, cried Morel, turning pale. What is it? A loud noise was heard on the stairs, of people moving hastily, and half-stifled sobs. Morel rose and advanced to the door, but his strength failed him as he sank to the chair. The two men remained opposite one another, Morel trembling in every limb, the stranger gazing at him with an air of profound pity. The noise had ceased, but it seemed that Morel expected something. Something had occasioned the noise, and something must follow. The stranger fancied he heard footsteps on the stairs, and that the footsteps, which were those of several persons, stopped at the door. A key was inserted into the lock of the first door, and the creaking of the hinges was audible. There are only two persons who have the key to that door, murmured Morel, Cocles and Julie. At this instant the second door opened, and the young girl, her eyes bathed with tears, appeared. Morel rose, trembling, supporting himself by the arm of the chair. He would have spoken, but his voice failed him. "Oh, father," said she, clasping her hands, "forgive your child for being the bearer of evil tidings." Morel again changed color. Julie threw herself into his arms. "Oh, father, father!" murmured she. "Courage!" "The Baron has gone down, then?" said Morel in a hoarse voice. The young girl did not speak, but she made an affirmative sign with her head as she lay on her father's breast. "And the crew?" asked Morel. "Saved," said the girl. "Saved by the crew of the vessel that has just entered the harbor." Morel raised his two hands to heaven with an expression of resignation and sublime gratitude. "Thanks, my God," said he. "At least thou strikest but me alone." A tear moistened the eye of the phlegmatic Englishman. Come in," said Morel, "for I presume you are all at the door." Scarcely had he uttered those words when Madame Morel entered, weeping bitterly. Emmanuel followed her, and in the antechamber were visible the rough faces of 7 or 8 half-naked sailors. At the sight of these men the Englishman started and advanced a step, then restrained himself and retired into the farthest and most obscure corner of the apartment. Madame Morel sat down by her husband and took one of his hands in hers. Julie still lay with her head on his shoulder. Emmanuel stood in the centre and seemed to form the link between Morel's family and the sailors at the door. "How did this happen?" said Morel. "Draw nearer, Penelon," said the young man, "and tell us all about it." An old seaman, bronzed by the tropical sun, advanced, twirling the remains of a tarpaulin between his hands. "Good day, Mr. Morel," said he, as if he had just quitted Marseille the previous evening and had just returned from Aix or Toulon. "Good day, Penelon," returned Morel, who could not refrain from smiling through his tears. "Where is the captain?" "The captain, Monsieur Morel, has stayed back, sick, at the Palma. But please God it won't be much, and you will see him in a few days, all alive and hearty." "Well, now tell your story, Penelon." Penelon rolled his quid in his cheek, placed his hand before his mouth, turned his head, and sent a long jet of tobacco juice into the antechamber, advanced his foot, balanced himself, and began. "You see, Monsieur Morel," said he, "we were somewhere between Cap Blanc and Cap Boyador, sailing with a fair breeze south-southwest after a week's calm, when Captain Gaumont comes up and says to me, I was at the helm, I should tell you, and says, 'Penelon, what do you think of these clouds coming up over here?' I was just then looking at them myself. 'What do I say, Captain? Why, I think they are rising faster than they have any business to do, and that they would not be so black if they didn't mean mischief.' 'That's my opinion, too,' said the captain. 'I'll take precautions accordingly. We are carrying too much canvas. Avast there, all hands! Take in the studding sails. Bestow the flying jib.' It was time. The squall was on us, and the vessel began to heel. 'Ah!' paid the captain. 'We have still too much canvas set. All hands, lower the mainsail!' 5 minutes later it was down, and we sailed under mizzen topsails and topgallantsails. 'Well, Penelon,' said the captain, 'what makes you shake your head?' 'Why,' I says, 'I think you still have too much on.' 'I think you're right,' answered he. 'We shall have a gale.' 'A gale? More than that. We shall have a tempest, or I don't know what's what. You could see the wind coming like the dust at Montredon. Luckily the captain understood his business. 'Take in 2 reefs and the topsails,' cried the captain. 'Let go the bowlines. Haul the brace. Lower the topgallant sails. Haul out the reef tackles on the yards.' 'That was not enough for those latitudes,' said the Englishman. 'I should have taken 4 reefs in the topsails and furled the spinnaker.' His firm, sonorous, and unexpected voice made everyone start. Penelon put his hand over his eyes, then stared at the man who thus criticized the manoeuvres of his captain. 'We did better than that, sir,' said the old sailor respectfully. 'We put up the helm to run before the tempest 10 minutes after we struck our topsails and scudded under bare poles.' 'The vessel was very old to risk that. said the Englishman. It was that did the business. After pitching heavily for 12 hours, we sprung a leak. Penelon, said the captain, I think we are sinking. Give me the helm and go down into the hold. I gave him the helm and descended. There was already 3 feet of water. All hands to the pumps, I shouted, but it was too late, and it seemed that the more we pumped, the more came in. Ah, said I, after 4 hours' work, since we are sinking, let us sink. We can die but once. That's the example you set, Penelon, cries the captain. Well, wait a minute. He went into his cabin and came back with a brace of pistols. I'll blow the brains out of the first man who leaves the pump, said he. Well done, said the Englishman. There's nothing that gives you so much courage as good reasons, continued the sailor. And during that time the wind had abated, the sea had gone down, but the water kept rising. Not much, only 2 inches an hour, but still it rose. 2 inches an hour does not seem much, but in 12 hours that makes 2 feet, and 3 we had before, that makes 5. Come, said the captain, we have all done all in our power, and Monsieur Morel will have nothing to reproach us with. We have tried to save the ship, let us now save ourselves. To the boats, my lads, as quick as you can. Now, continued Penelon, now you see, Monsieur Morel, a sailor is attached to the ship, but still more to his life, so we did not wait to be told twice. The more so that the ship was sinking under us and seemed to say, Get along, save yourselves. We soon launched the boat, and all 8 of us got into it. The captain descended last. Or rather, he did not descend, he would not quit the vessel. So I took him round the waist, and I threw him into the boat, and then I jumped after him. It was time, for just as I jumped, the deck burst with a noise like the broadside of a man-o'-war. 10 minutes after, she pitched forward, then the other way, and spun round, and then goodbye to the Farron. As for us, we were 3 days without anything to eat or drink, so that we began to think of drawing lots who would feed the rest. And then we saw La Gironde, and made signals of distress. She perceived us, made for us, and took us all on board. There now, Monsieur Morel, that's the whole truth, on the honor of a sailor. Is it not true, you fellows there? A general murmur of approbation showed that the narrator had faithfully detailed their misfortunes and sufferings. Well, said Monsieur Morel, I know there was no one in fault but destiny. It was the will of God that this should happen, blessed be his name. What wage is due to you? Oh, do not let us talk of that, Monsieur Morel. Yes, but we will talk of it. Well, then, 3 months, said Penelon. Cocles, pay 200 francs to each of these good fellows, said Morel. At another time, added he, I should have said, give them besides 200 francs over as a present, but times have changed, and the little money that remains to me is not my own. Penelon turned to his companions and exchanged a few words with them. As for that, Monsieur Morel, said he, again turning his quid, as for that. As for what? The money. Well, we all say that 50 francs would be enough for us at present, and we will wait for the rest. Oh, thanks, my friends, thanks, cried Morel gratefully. Take it, and if you can find another employer, enter his service. You are free to do so. These last words produced a prodigious effect on the seaman. Penelon nearly swallowed his quid. Fortunately, he recovered. What, Monsieur Morel? Said he in a low voice. You send us away? You are then angry with us? No, said Monsieur Morel, I am not angry, quite the contrary, and I do not send you away, but I have no more ships, and therefore I do not want any sailors. No more ships? Returned Penelon. Well, then you'll build some, and we'll wait for you. I have no money to build ships with, Penelon, said the poor owner mournfully. so I cannot accept your kind offer." "No more money? Well, then you must not pay us. We can scud like the Farron under bare poles." "Enough, enough," cried Morel, almost overpowered. "Leave me, I pray you, and we shall meet again in a happier time. Emmanuel, go with them and see that my orders are executed." "At least we shall see each other again, Monsieur Morel?" asked Penelon. "Yes, I hope so, at least. Now go." He made a sign to Cocles, who went first. The seaman followed him, and Emmanuel brought up the rear. "Now," said the owner to his wife and daughter, "leave me, for I wish to speak with this gentleman." And he glanced toward the clerk of Thomson and French, who had remained motionless in the corner during the scene, in which he had taken no part except the few words we have mentioned. The two women looked at this person whose presence had been entirely forgotten, and retired. But as she left the apartment, Julie gave the stranger a supplicating glance, to which she replied by a smile that an indifferent spectator would have been surprised to see on his stern features. The two men were left alone. "Well, sir," said Morel, sinking into a chair, "you have heard all. I have nothing further to tell you." "I see," returned the Englishman, "that a fresh and unmerited misfortune has overwhelmed you, and this only increases my desire to serve you." "Oh, sir!" cried Morel. "Let me see," continued the stranger. "I am one of your largest creditors." "Your bills, at least, are the first that will fall due." "Do you wish for time to pay?" "A delay would save my honor, and consequently my life." "How long a delay do you wish for?" Morel reflected. 2 months, said he. "I will give you 3," replied the stranger. "But," asked Morel, "will the house of Thomson and French consent?" "Oh, I take everything on myself. Today is the 5th of June." "Yes." "Well, renew these bills up to the 5th of September, and on the 5th of September at 11 o'clock," the hand of the clock pointed to 11, "I shall come to receive the money." "I shall expect you," returned Morel, "and I will pay you or I shall be dead." These last words were uttered in so low a tone that the stranger could not hear them. The bills were renewed, the old ones destroyed, and the poor shipowner found himself with 3 months before him to collect his resources. The Englishman received his thanks with the phlegm particular to his nation, and Morel, overwhelming him with a grateful blessing, conducted him to the staircase. The stranger met Julie on the stairs. She pretended to be descending, but in reality was waiting for him. "Oh, sir!" said she, clasping her hands. "Mademoiselle," said the stranger, "one day you will receive a letter signed Sinbad the Sailor. Do exactly what the letter bids you, however strange it may appear." "Yes, sir," returned Julie. "Do you promise?" "I swear to you I will." "It is well. Adieu, mademoiselle. Continue to be the good, sweet girl you are at present, and I have great hopes that heaven will reward you by giving you Emmanuel for a husband." Julie uttered a faint cry, blushed like a rose, and leaned against the baluster. The stranger waved his hand, and continued to descend. In the court he found Penelon, who, with a rouleau of 100 francs in either hand, seemed unable to make up his mind to retain them. "Come with me, my friend," said the Englishman. "I wish to speak to you." So ends chapter 29, The House of Morel and Son.
This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recorded by Maria Tafidis. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 30. the 5th of September. The extension provided for by the agent of Thomson and French, at the moment when Morel expected it least, was to the poor ship owner so decided a stroke of good fortune, that he almost dared to believe that fate was at length grown weary of wasting her spite upon him. The same day he told his wife, Emmanuel, and his daughter, all that had occurred, and a ray of hope, if not of tranquillity, returned to the family. Unfortunately, however, Morel had not only engagements with the house of Thomson and French, who had shown themselves so considerate towards him, and as he had said, in business he had correspondents and not friends. When he thought the matter over, he could by no means account for this generous conduct on the part of Thomson and French towards him, and could only attribute it to some such selfish arguments as this: "We had better help a man who owes us nearly 300,000 francs, and have those 300,000 francs at the end of 3 months, than hasten his ruin, and get only 6 or 8% of our money back again." Unfortunately, whether through envy or stupidity, all Morel's correspondents did not take this view, and some even came to a contrary decision. The bills signed by Morel were presented at his office with scrupulous exactitude, and thanks to the delay granted by the Englishman, were paid by Cocle with equal punctuality. Cocle thus remained in his accustomed tranquillity. It was Morel alone who remembered with alarm that if he had to repay on the 15th the 50,000 francs of M. de Beauville, and on the 30th the 32,500 francs of bills, for which, as well as the debt due to the inspector of prisons, he had time granted, he must be a ruined man. The opinion of all the commercial men was that, under the reverses which had successively weighed down Morel, it was impossible for him to remain solvent. Great, therefore, was the astonishment when at the end of the month he cancelled all his obligations with his usual punctuality. Still confidence was not restored to all minds, and the general opinion was that the complete ruin of the unfortunate shipowner had been postponed only until the end of the month. The month passed, and Morel made extraordinary efforts to get in all his resources. Formerly his paper, at any date, was taken with confidence and was even in request. Morel now tried to negotiate bills at 90 days only, and none of the banks would give him credit. Fortunately, Morel had some funds coming in on which he could rely, and as they reached him, he found himself in a condition to meet his engagements when the end of July came. The agent of Thomson and French had not been again seen at Marseille. The day after, or 2 days after his visit to Morel, he had disappeared, and as in that city he had had no intercourse but with the mayor, the inspector of prisons, and M. Morel, his departure left no trace except in the memories of these 3 persons. As to the sailors of the Pharaon, they must have found snug berths elsewhere, for they also had disappeared. Captain Gaumard, recovered from his illness, had returned from Palma. He delayed presenting himself at Morel's, but the owner, hearing of his arrival, went to see him. The worthy shipowner knew, from Penelon's recital, of the captain's brave conduct during the storm, and tried to console him. He brought him also the amount of his wages, which Captain Gaumard had not dared to apply for. As he descended the staircase, Morel met Penelon, who was going up. Penelon had, it would seem, made good use of his money, for he was newly clad. When he saw his employer, the worthy tar seemed much embarrassed, drew on one side into the corner of the landing-place, passed his quid from one cheek to the other, stared stupidly with his great eyes, and only acknowledged the squeeze of the hand which Morel as usual gave him, by a slight pressure in return. Morel attributed Penelon's embarrassment to the elegance of his attire. It was evident the good fellow had not gone to such an expense on his own account. He was no doubt engaged on board some other vessel, and thus his bashfulness arose from the fact of his not having, if we may so express ourselves, worn mourning for the Pharaon longer. Perhaps he had come to tell Captain Gaumard of his good luck, and to offer him employment from his new master. "Worthy fellows," said Morel as he went away, "may your new master love you as I loved you, and be more fortunate than I have been." August rolled by an unceasing effort on the part of Morel to renew his credit or revive the old. On the 20th of August it was known at Marseilles that he had left town in the mail coach, and then it was said that the bills would go to protest at the end of the month, and that Morel had gone away and left his chief clerk Emmanuel and his cashier Cocle to meet the creditors. But contrary to all expectation, when the 31st of August came, the house opened as usual, and Cocle appeared behind the grating on the counter, examined all bills presented with the usual scrutiny, and from first to last paid all with the usual precision. There came in, moreover, 2 drafts which M. Morel had fully anticipated, and which Cocle paid as punctually as the bills which the shipowner had accepted. All this was incomprehensible, and then, with a tenacity peculiar to prophets of bad news, the failure was put off until the end of September. On the 1st, Morel returned. He was awaited by his family with extreme anxiety, for from this journey to Paris they hoped great things. Morel had thought of Danglars, who was now immensely rich, and had laid on great obligations to Morel in former days, since to him it was owing that Danglars entered the service of the Spanish banker, with whom he had laid the foundations of his vast wealth. It was said at this moment that Danglars was worth from 6 to 8 millions of francs, and had unlimited credit. Danglars, then, without taking a crown from his pocket, could save Morel. He had but to pass his word for a loan, and Morel was saved. Morel had long thought of Danglars, but had kept away from some instinctive motive, and had delayed as long as possible availing himself of this last resource. And Morel was right, for he returned home crushed by the humiliation of a refusal. Yet on his arrival Morel did not utter a complaint or say one harsh word. He embraced his weeping wife and daughter, pressed Emmanuel's hand with friendly warmth, and then going to his private room on the 2nd floor, had sent for Cocle. Then said the 2 women to Emmanuel, "We are indeed ruined." It was agreed in a brief council held among them, that Julie should write to her brother, who was in garrison at Nîmes, to come to them as speedily as possible. The poor women felt instinctively that they required all their strength to support the blow that impended. Besides, Maximilien Morel, though hardly 22, had great influence over his father. He was a strong-minded, upright young man. At the time when he decided on his profession, his father had no desire to choose for him, but had consulted young Maximilien's taste. He had at once declared for military life, and had in consequence studied hard, passed brilliantly through the Polytechnic school, and left it as sub-lieutenant of the 53rd of the line. For a year he had held this rank, and expected promotion on the first vacancy. In his regiment, Maximilien Morel was noted for his rigid observance, not only of the obligations imposed on a soldier, but also of the duties of a man, and he thus gained the name of the Stoic. We need hardly say that many of those who gave him this epithet repeated it because they had heard it and did not even know what it meant. This was the young man whom his mother and sister called to their aid, to sustain them under the serious trial which they felt they would soon have to endure. They had not mistaken the gravity of this event, for the moment after Morel had entered his private office with Cocle, Julie saw the latter leave it pale, trembling, and his features betraying the utmost consternation. She would have questioned him as he passed by her, but the worthy creature hastened down the staircase with unusual precipitation, and only raised his hands to heaven and exclaimed, "Oh, mademoiselle, mademoiselle, what a dreadful misfortune! Who could ever have believed it?" A moment afterwards, Julie saw him go upstairs carrying 2 or 3 heavy ledgers, a portfolio, and a bag of money. Morel examined the ledgers, opened the portfolio, and counted the money. All his funds amounted to 6,000 or 8,000 francs, his bills receivable up to the 5th to 4,000 or 5,000, which, making the best of everything, gave him 14,000 francs to meet debts amounting to 287,500 francs. He had not even the means for making a possible settlement on account. However, when Morel went down to his dinner, he appeared very calm. This calmness was more alarming to the 2 women than the deepest dejection would have been. After dinner Morel usually went out, and used to take his coffee at the Phocéan Club, and read a semaphore. This day he did not leave the house, but returned to his office. As to Coq, he seemed completely bewildered. For part of the day he went into the courtyard, seated himself on a stone with his head bare and exposed to the blazing sun. Emmanuel tried to comfort the women, but his eloquence faltered. The young man was too well acquainted with the business of the house not to feel that a great catastrophe hung over the Morel family. Night came. The 2 women had watched, hoping that when he left his room Morel would come to them, but they heard him pass before their door, and tried to conceal the noise of his footsteps. They listened. He went to his sleeping room, and fastened the door inside. Madame Morel sent her daughter to bed, and half an hour after Julie had retired, she rose, took off her shoes, and went stealthily along the passage to see through the keyhole what her husband was doing. In the passage she saw a retreating shadow. It was Julie, who, uneasy herself, had anticipated her mother. The young lady went towards Madame Morel. "He is writing," she said. They had understood each other without speaking. Madame Morel looked again through the keyhole. Morel was writing, but Madame Morel remarked, what her daughter had not observed, that her husband was writing on stamped paper. The terrible idea that he was writing his will flashed across her. She shuddered, and yet had not strength to utter a word. Next day Monsieur Morel seemed as calm as ever, went into his office as usual, came to his breakfast punctually, and then after dinner he placed his daughter beside him, took her head in his arms, and held her for a long time against his bosom. In the evening Julie told her mother that although he was apparently so calm, she had noticed that her father's heart beat violently. The next 2 days passed in much the same way. On the evening of the 4th of September, Monsieur Morel asked his daughter for the key of his study. Julie trembled at this request, which seemed to her of bad omen. Why did her father ask for this key, which she always kept, and which was only taken from her in childhood as a punishment? The young girl looked at Morel. "What have I done wrong, father," she said, "that you should take this key from me?" "Nothing, my dear," replied the unhappy man, the tears starting to his eyes at this simple question. "Nothing, only I want it." Julie made a pretence to feel for the key. "I must have left it in my room," she said, and she went out, but instead of going to her apartment she hastened to consult Emmanuel. "Do not give this key to your father," said he, "and tomorrow morning, if possible, do not quit him for a moment." She questioned Emmanuel, but he knew nothing or would not say what he knew. During the night, between the 4th and 5th of September, Madame Morel remained listening for every sound, and until 3 o'clock in the morning she heard her husband pacing the room in great agitation. It was 3 o'clock when he threw himself on the bed. The mother and daughter passed the night together. They had expected Maximilien since the previous evening. At 8 o'clock in the morning Morel entered their chamber. He was calm, but the agitation of the night was legible in his pale and careworn visage. They did not dare to ask him how he had slept. Morel was kinder to his wife, more affectionate to his daughter, than he had ever been. He could not cease gazing at and kissing the sweet girl. Julie, mindful of Manuel's request, was following her father when he quitted the room, but he said to her quickly, "Remain with your mother, dearest." Julie wished to accompany him. "I wish you to do so," said he. This was the first time Morel had ever so spoken, but he said it in a tone of paternal kindness, and Julie did not dare to disobey. She remained on the same spot, standing mute and motionless. An instant afterwards the door opened. She felt two arms encircle her, and a mouth pressed her forehead. She looked up and uttered an exclamation of joy. "Maximilien, my dearest brother!" she cried. At these words Madame Morel rose, and threw herself into her son's arms. "Mother," said the young man, looking alternately at Madame Morel and her daughter, "what has occurred? What has happened? Your letter has frightened me, and I have come hither with all speed." "Julie," said Madame Morel, making a sign to the young man, "go and tell your father that Maximilien has just arrived." The young lady rushed out of the apartment, but on the first step of the staircase she found a man holding a letter in his hand. "Are you not Mademoiselle Julie Morel?" inquired the man, with a strong Italian accent. "Yes, sir," replied Julie with hesitation. "What is your pleasure? I do not know you." "Read this letter," he said, handing it to her. Julie hesitated. "It concerns the best interests of your father," said the messenger. The young girl hastily took the letter from him. She opened it quickly and read, "Go this moment to the Allée de Meilhan. Enter the house number 15. Ask the porter for the key of the room on the 5th floor. Enter the apartment. Take from the corner of the mantelpiece a purse netted in red silk, and give it to your father. It is important that he should receive it before 11 o'clock. You promised to obey me implicitly. Remember your oath. Sinbad the Sailor." The young girl uttered a joyful cry, raised her eyes, looked round to question the messenger, but he had disappeared. She cast her eyes again over the note to peruse it a second time, and saw there was a postscript. She read, "It is important that you should fulfill this mission in person and alone. If you go accompanied by any other person, or should anyone else go in your place, the porter will reply that he does not know anything about it." This postscript decreased greatly the young girl's happiness. Was there nothing to fear? Was there not some snare laid for her? Her innocence had kept her in ignorance of the dangers that might assail a young girl of her age, but there is no need to know danger in order to fear it. Indeed, it may be observed that it is usually unknown perils that inspire the greatest terror. Julie hesitated and resolved to take counsel. Yet through a singular impulse, it was neither to her mother nor her brother that she applied, but to Emmanuel. She hastened down and told him what had occurred on the day when the agent of Thomson and French had come to her father's, related the scene on the staircase, repeated the promise she had made, and showed him the letter. "You must go then, mademoiselle," said Emmanuel. "Go there?" murmured Julie. "Yes, I will accompany you." "But did you not read that I must be alone?" said Julie. "And you shall be alone," replied the young man. "I will await you at the corner of the Rue des Musées, and if you are so long absent as to make me uneasy, I will hasten to rejoin you, and woe to him of whom you shall have cause to complain to me." "Then, Emmanuel," said the young girl with hesitation, "it is your opinion that I should obey this invitation?" "Yes. Did not the messenger say your father's safety depended upon it?" "But what danger threatens him, then, Emmanuel?" she asked. Emmanuel hesitated a moment, but his desire to make Julie decide immediately made him reply. "Listen," he said. "To-day is the 5th of September, is it not?" "Yes." "To-day, then, at 11 o'clock, your father has nearly 300,000 francs to pay." "Yes, we know that." "Well, then," continued Emmanuel, "we have not 15,000 francs in the house. What will happen then? Why, if today, before 11 o'clock, your father has not found someone who will come to his aid, he will be compelled at 12 o'clock to declare himself a bankrupt. Oh, come then, come! cried she, hastening away with the young man. During this time, Madame Morel had told her son everything. The young man knew quite well that, after the succession of misfortunes which had befallen his father, great changes had taken place in the style of living and housekeeping. But he did not know that matters had reached such a point. He was thunderstruck. Then rushing hastily out of the apartment, he ran upstairs, expecting to find his father in his study. But he rapped there in vain. While he was yet at the door of the study, he heard the bedroom door open, turn, and saw his father. Instead of going direct to his study, Monsieur Morel had returned to his bedchamber, which he was only this moment quitting. Morel uttered a cry of surprise at the sight of his son, of whose arrival he was ignorant. He remained motionless on the spot, pressing with his left hand something he had concealed under his coat. Maximilien sprang down the staircase, and threw his arms round his father's neck, but suddenly recoiled and placed his right hand on Morel's breast. "Father," he exclaimed, turning pale as death, "what are you going to do with that brace of pistols under your coat?" "Oh, this is what I feared," said Morel. "Father, father, in heaven's name!" exclaimed the young man, "what are these weapons for?" "Maximilien," replied Morel, looking fixedly at his son, "you are a man and a man of honor. Come, and I will explain to you." And with a firm step, Morel went up to his study, while Maximilien followed him, trembling as he went. Morel opened the door and closed it behind his son, then crossing the ante-room, went to his desk on which he placed the pistols, and pointed with his finger to an open ledger. In this ledger was made out an exact balance sheet of his affairs. Morel had to pay within half an hour 297,500 francs. All he possessed was 15,257 francs. "Read," said Morel. The young man was overwhelmed as he read. Morel said not a word. What could he say? What need he add to such a desperate proof in figures? "And have you done all that is possible, father, to meet this disastrous result?" asked the young man after a moment's pause. "I have," replied Morel. "You have no money coming in on which you can rely?" "None." "You have exhausted every resource?" "All." "And in half an hour," said Maximilien in a gloomy voice, "our name is dishonored." "Blood washes out dishonor," said Morel. "You are right, father. I understand you." Then extending his hand towards one of the pistols, he said, "There is one for you, and one for me. Thanks." Morel caught his hand. "Your mother! Your sister! Who will support them?" A shudder ran through the young man's frame. "Father," said, "do you reflect that you are bidding me to live?" "Yes, I do so bid you," answered Morel. "It is your duty. You have a calm, strong mind, Maximilien. Maximilien, you are no ordinary man. I make no request or command. I only ask you to examine my position as if it were your own, and then judge for yourself." The young man reflected for a moment. Then an expression of sublime resignation appeared in his eyes, and with a slow and sad gesture he took off his two epaulettes, the insignia of his rank. "Be it so, then, my father," he said, extending his hand to Morel. "Die in peace, my father. I will live." Morel was about to cast himself on his knees before his son, but Maximilien caught him in his arms, and those two noble hearts were pressed against each other for a moment. "You know it is not my fault," said Morel. Maximilien smiled. "I know, father. You are the most honorable man I have ever known." "Good, my son. And now there is no more to be said. Go and rejoin your mother and sister." "My father," said the young man, bending his knee, "bless me." Morel took the head of his son between his two hands, drew him forward, and kissing his forehead several times, said, "Oh, yes, yes, I bless you in my own name, and in the name of 3 generations of irreproachable men, who say through me, 'The edifice which misfortune has destroyed Providence may build up again. On seeing me die such a death, the most inexorable will have pity on you. To you, perhaps, they will accord the time they have refused to me. Then do your best to keep our name free from dishonor. Go to work, labor, young man, struggle ardently and courageously. Live yourself, your mother and sister, with the most rigid economy, so that from day to day the property of those whom I leave in your hands may augment and fructify. Reflect how glorious a day it will be, how grand, how solemn, that day of complete restoration, on which you will say in this very office, "My father died because he could not do what I have this day done, but he died calmly and peaceably, because in dying he knew what I should do." "My father!" cried the young man, "why should you not live?" "If I live, all would be changed. If I live, interest would be converted into doubt, pity into hostility. If I live, I am only a man who has broken his word, failed in his engagements, in fact, only a bankrupt. If, on the contrary, I die, remember, Maximilien, my corpse is that of an honest but unfortunate man. Living, my best friends would avoid my house. Dead, all Marseille will follow me in tears to my last home. Living, you would feel shame at my name. Dead, you may raise your head and say, I am the son of him you killed, because for the first time he has been compelled to break his word." The young man uttered a groan, but appeared resigned. "And now," said Morel, "leave me alone, and endeavor to keep your mother and sister away." "Will you not see my sister once more?" asked Maximilien. Alas, by final hope was concealed by the young man in the effect of this interview, and therefore he had suggested it. Morel shook his head. "I saw her this morning, and bade her adieu." "Have you not particular commands to live with me, my father?" inquired Maximilien in a faltering voice. "Yes, my son, and a sacred command." "Say it, my father." "The house of Thomson and French is the only one who, from humanity, or it may be selfishness, it is not for me to read men's hearts, has had any pity for me. Its agent will in 10 minutes present himself to receive the amount of a bill of 287,500 francs. I will not say granted, but offer me 3 months. Let this house be the first repaid, my son, and respect this man." "Father, I will," said Maximilien. "And now once more adieu," said Morel. "Go, leave me. I would be alone. You will find my will in the secretary in my bedroom." The young man remained standing and motionless, having by the force of will and not the power of execution. "Hear me, Maximilien," said his father. "Suppose I was a soldier like you, and ordered to carry a certain redoubt, and you knew I must be killed in the assault. Would you not say to me, as you said just now, 'Go, father, for you are dishonored by delay, and death is preferable to shame'?" "Yes, yes," said the young man, "yes." And once again embracing his father with convulsive pressure, he said, "Be it so, my father." And he rushed out of the study. When his son had left him, Morel remained an instant standing with his eyes fixed on the door. Then putting forth his arm, he pulled the bell. After a moment's interval, Cocle appeared. It was no longer the same man. The fearful revelations of the 3 last days had crushed him. As he thought, the house of Morel is about to stop payment, and bend him to the earth more than 20 years would otherwise have done. "My worthy Cocle," said Morel, in a tone impossible to describe, "do you remain in the antechamber? When the gentleman who came 3 months ago, the agent of Thomson and French, arrives, announce his arrival to me." Cocle made no reply. He made a sign with his head, went into the ante-room, and seated himself. Morel fell back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the clock. There were 7 minutes left, that was all. The hand moved on with incredible rapidity. He seemed to see its motion. What passed in the mind of this man at the supreme moment of his agony cannot be told in words. He was still comparatively young, he was surrounded by the loving care of a devoted family, but he had convinced himself by a course of reasoning, illogical perhaps, yet certainly plausible, that he must separate himself from all he held dear in the world, even life itself. To form the slightest idea of his feeling, one must have seen his face, with its expression of enforced resignation, and its tear-moistened eyes, raised to heaven. The minute hand moved on. The pistols were loaded. He stretched forth his hand, took one up, and murmured his daughter's name. Then he laid it down, seized his pen, and wrote a few words. It seemed to him as if he had not taken a sufficient farewell of his beloved daughter. Then he turned again to the clock, counting time not by minutes, but by seconds. He took up the deadly weapon again, his lips parted and his eyes fixed on the clock, and then shuddered at the click of the trigger as he cocked the pistol. At this moment of mortal anguish, the cold sweat came forth upon his brow, a pang stronger than death clutched at his heartstrings. He heard the door of the staircase creak on its hinges. The clock gave its warning strike 11. The door of his study opened. Morel did not turn round, expecting these words of Coquelin, the agent of Thomson and French. He placed the muzzle of the pistol between his teeth. Suddenly he heard a cry. It was his daughter's voice. He turned and saw Julie. The pistol fell from his hand. "My father!" cried the young girl, out of breath and half dead with joy. "Saved! You are saved!" And she threw herself into his arms, holding in her extended hand a red, netted silk purse. "Saved, my child?" said Morel. "What do you mean?" "Yes, saved! Saved! See! See!" said the young girl. Morel took the purse, and started as he did so, for a vague remembrance reminded him that it once belonged to himself. At one end was a receipted bill for the 287,000 francs, and at the other was a diamond as large as a hazelnut, with these words on a small slip of parchment: "Julie's dowry." Morel passed his hand over his brow. It seemed to him a dream. At this moment the clock struck 11. He felt as if a stroke of the hammer fell upon his heart. "Explain, my child," he said. "Explain, my child. Where did you find this purse?" "In a house in the Allée de Meillan, number 15, on the corner of a mantelpiece, in a small room on the 5th floor." "But," cried Morel, "this purse is not yours." Julie handed to her father the letter she had received in the morning. "And did you go alone?" said Morel after he had read it. "Emmanuel accompanied me, father. He was to have waited for me at the corner of the Rue du Musée, but strange to say, he was not there when I returned." "Monsieur Morel!" exclaimed a voice on the stairs. "Monsieur Morel!" "It is his voice," said Julie. At this moment Emmanuel entered, his countenance full of animation and joy. "The Pharaon!" he cried. "The Pharaon!" What the Pharaon? Are you mad, Emmanuel? You know the vessel is lost." "The Pharaon, sir! They signal the Pharaon! The Pharaon is entering the harbor!" Morel fell back in his chair. His strength was failing him. His understanding, weakened by such events, refused to comprehend such incredible, unheard of, fabulous facts. But his son came in. "Father," cried Maxime, "how could you say the Pharaon was lost? The lookout has signaled her, and they say she is now coming into port." "My dear friend," said Morel, "if this be so, it must be a miracle of heaven. Impossible, impossible!" But what was real and not less incredible was the purse he held in his hand, the acceptance receipted, the splendid diamond. "Ah, sir," exclaimed Coquelin, "what can it mean? The Pharaon—" "Come, dear ones," said Morel, rising from his seat, "let us go and see, and heaven have pity upon us if it be false intelligence." They all went out, and on the stairs met Madame Morel, who had been afraid to go up into the study. In a moment they were at the Canebière. There was a crowd on the pier. All the crowd gave way before Morel. "The Pharaon! The Pharaon!" said every voice. And wonderful to see, in front of the tower of Saint Jean, was a ship bearing on her stern these words, printed in white letters: "The Pharaon, Morel and Son, of Marseille." She was the exact duplicate of the other Pharaon, and loaded as they had been with cochineal and indigo. She cast anchor, clewed up sails, and on the deck was Captain Gaumard giving orders, and good old Penelon making signals to Monsieur Morel. To doubt any longer was impossible. There was the evidence of the senses, and 10,000 persons who came to corroborate the testimony. As Morel and his son embraced on the pier head, in the presence and amid the applause of the whole city witnessing this event, a man, with his face half covered by a black beard, and who, concealed behind the sentry-box, watched the scene with delight, uttered these words in a low tone: "Be happy, noble heart! Be blessed for all the good thou hast done and wilt do hereafter, and let my gratitude remain in obscurity like your good deeds." And with a smile expressive of supreme content, he left his hiding place, and without being observed, descended one of the flights of steps provided for debarkation, and hailing 3 times, shouted, "Jacopo, Jacopo, Jacopo!" Then a launch came to shore, took him on board, and conveyed him to a yacht splendidly fitted up, on whose deck he sprung with the activity of a sailor. Thence he once again looked towards Morel, who, weeping with joy, was shaking hands most cordially with all the crowd round him, and thanking with a look the unknown benefactor whom he seemed to be seeking in the skies. "And now," said the unknown, "farewell, kindness, humanity, and gratitude, farewell to all the feelings that expand the heart. I have been heaven's substitute to recompense the good. Now the God of vengeance yields to me his power to punish the wicked." By these words he gave a signal, and as if only awaiting this signal, the yacht instantly put out to sea. End of chapter 30.